Before we begin, if you're listening to this alone at night, you're exactly where you should be. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more true horror stories, disturbing encounters, and unexplained events uploaded every day. Now lock your doors, turn off the lights, and let's get into tonight's stories. I've always preferred kayaks over motorboats. A boat announces you're coming. A kayak doesn't. You move quietly. You notice things most people miss. Birds landing in the reeds. Fish breaking the surface. The sound of the current changing beneath you. It's peaceful. Or at least, that's what I always believed. Until one trip made me realize, sometimes there's a reason the water is quiet. And sometimes, it's because you're not supposed to be there. This happened in late May of 2023. I'd recently bought a 12-foot fishing kayak after spending nearly a year saving for it. Nothing expensive, just stable enough to fish from and light enough to load by myself. Most weekends I'd drive somewhere within a few hours of home and spend the day exploring rivers and small lakes. I wasn't chasing trophy fish. I just liked being alone on the water. One Friday afternoon, a coworker mentioned a place called Black Creek Preserve in eastern Tennessee. He said hardly anyone paddled there because there wasn't much fishing. That sounded perfect. The fewer people, the better. I arrived just after 6 on Saturday morning. The parking area was tiny. Only 6 spaces. 5 sat empty. The 6th contained an older Subaru with 2 kayaks strapped to the roof. Nobody was around. I assumed the owners had launched before sunrise. The launch itself wasn't much. Just a narrow gravel path leading into a slow-moving creek. The water looked almost perfectly still. Tall cypress trees leaned over both banks. Morning fog drifted across the surface. The entire place felt untouched. A weathered information board stood beside the launch. Most of the notices were faded. Trail maps, wildlife information, emergency contacts. One newer sign caught my attention. It simply read, "Remain on main channel." Nothing unusual. Lots of preserves protected sensitive habitats. I figured they just didn't want people disturbing nesting areas. The first hour was exactly what I'd hoped for. No people, no noise, just the sound of my paddle dipping into the water. Blue herons lifted from the shoreline as I drifted past. Turtles climbed onto fallen logs. The creek wound gently through thick woods. Every bend revealed another postcard view. Around 8, I noticed another kayak. It floated nearly 200 yards ahead. Dark green. Sit inside model. No movement. Whoever was paddling seemed to be taking a break. I raised one hand. No response. No big deal. Some people came out specifically to avoid conversation. I kept paddling. 10 minutes later, I rounded another bend. The same kayak floated ahead. Same distance. Same position. I frowned. The creek only had one route. There was no way they'd gotten that far ahead without me seeing them paddle. I picked up the pace. Within a few minutes, I was close enough to make out details. There wasn't anyone inside. The paddle rested across the cockpit. A life jacket lay folded behind the seat. The kayak drifted perfectly straight down the center of the creek. I stopped paddling. So did it. Not gradually. Immediately. I stared for several seconds. Then convinced myself the current had changed. Reasonable explanation. Mostly. I started paddling again. The empty kayak drifted forward again. Always staying the same distance away. About half an hour later, I reached a fork in the creek. The main channel continued left. A much narrower channel disappeared into dense trees on the right. A wooden post marked the split. An arrow pointed left. The right side carried a faded sign. No access. Simple enough. I turned left. As I rounded the bend, I looked back one last time. The empty kayak had entered the narrow channel. There wasn't anyone steering it. No wind. No visible current. It simply disappeared beneath the overhanging branches. That should have been the end of it. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. About 20 minutes later, I turned around, backtracked to the fork. The narrow channel looked almost inviting in the daylight. Calm water. No movement. I figured maybe the kayak had drifted in naturally. Just a quick look. 5 minutes. Then I'd leave. The opening barely fit my kayak. Branches brushed both shoulders as I paddled through. Almost immediately, the air felt cooler. The trees blocked nearly all the sunlight. The water became darker. The sounds of birds disappeared. Then, everything became silent. No insects. No frogs. Nothing. Only the gentle splash of my paddle. The channel narrowed even more. At one point, both banks were close enough to touch. I almost turned around. Almost. Then I saw the kayak again. It rested against the bank ahead. Still empty. Exactly as before. I paddled closer. The hull looked surprisingly clean. No registration sticker. No fishing gear. Nothing identifying the owner. Only one thing sat inside. A small waterproof map case. Curiosity won again. I reached over. Opened it. Inside was a folded trail map. Every route through the preserve had been highlighted in yellow. Except one. The narrow channel. Someone had circled it several times with a black marker. Across the circle, they'd written 3 words. Don't miss turn. I frowned. Miss what turn? There hadn't been another one. A twig snapped behind me. Not loud. Just enough to make me look. Nothing. Only trees. The water remained perfectly still. Then, another sound. A paddle entering the water. One stroke. Pause. Another stroke. Someone was paddling behind me. Slowly. Deliberately. I turned. The channel was empty. The sound continued anyway. Getting closer. Without thinking, I shoved the map back into the case. Turned my kayak. Started paddling. The unseen paddler matched my pace. One stroke. Pause. One stroke. Pause. Always behind me. Never visible. The fork finally came into view. Relief hit immediately. Then disappeared. The opening back to the main creek wasn't there. Only more trees. The channel continued straight. Exactly the same width. Exactly the same dark water. I stopped paddling. My breathing sounded unnaturally loud. Then, I heard a voice. Calm. Close. Almost beside me. You missed the turn. I spun around. Nobody. The paddle sound stopped. I checked my phone. No signal. The GPS app froze. The map showed my location in the middle of an empty gray screen. No creek. No roads. Nothing. I started paddling harder than I ever had before. After what felt like 10 minutes, sunlight suddenly appeared ahead. Then, the main creek. The same fork. The same wooden sign. The opening had somehow returned. I didn't stop. I paddled straight back to the launch. Loaded the kayak. Left without eating lunch. On the drive home, I realized something strange. The Subaru I'd seen that morning still sat in the parking lot. Exactly where it had been. Both kayaks still strapped to the roof. Nobody had ever launched. A week later, I searched online for Black Creek Preserve. I found an old local newspaper article from 2018. It described a kayaker who disappeared while exploring an unauthorized side channel. Search teams recovered his kayak 3 days later. It was found. Empty. Floating near the main creek. Inside, they found only one thing. A waterproof map case. I still kayak almost every weekend. I still prefer quiet places over crowded lakes. But now, whenever I come to a fork in the water, I don't wonder what's down the smaller channel anymore. Because every once in a while, when the water is perfectly still, I'll hear another paddle behind me. One slow stroke, then another, patiently waiting, to see if this time, I'll miss the turn. Every kayak launch has its own rhythm. People unload their gear, pump up inflatable kayaks, adjust life jackets, talk about where they're planning to paddle. Even if you don't know anyone, you're never really alone. That's why the empty launch bothered me. The parking lot was full. There were at least 15 vehicles, kayak trailers, bike racks, fishing gear visible through the windows. But there wasn't a single person. Not at the launch, not on the trails, not on the water. It looked like everyone had simply walked away. This happened in June of 2024. I'd taken a Friday off work to avoid the weekend crowds. My destination was a wildlife refuge along the Gulf Coast of Florida. It wasn't famous. Mostly locals paddled there. Miles of mangrove tunnels, shallow bays, small islands, perfect for photography. I'd visited once years earlier and remembered how peaceful it had been. I arrived around 7:30 in the morning. The weather was perfect. Light breeze, clear skies, high tide, exactly what you'd hope for. The first thing I noticed was the parking lot. Completely packed. At least 20 vehicles. Several expensive fishing kayaks. Roof racks. Boat trailers. One pickup even had a canoe still strapped down. I smiled. Guess I hadn't beaten the crowds after all. But as I grabbed my gear, I realized something. Nobody was talking. Nobody was unloading equipment. Nobody was anywhere. The entire parking area sat perfectly still. Every vehicle was locked. Most had a thin layer of pollen on the windshield, almost like they hadn't moved for days. I walked toward the launch, expecting everyone to already be on the water. The dock was empty. No kayaks. No paddles. Nothing. Just calm water beneath the morning sun. A park information board stood nearby. Trail maps. Wildlife notices. Tide schedules. Pinned beneath them, a handwritten note. It wasn't official. Someone had written it with a black marker. If you're alone, stay on the blue trail. I assumed it was some local joke. Nothing more. I launched anyway. The first hour was beautiful. The mangrove tunnels blocked the wind. Tiny fish darted beneath the kayak. Pelicans glided overhead. Exactly why I'd come. Eventually, the marked trail split into 3 directions. Blue, yellow, red. I remembered the note. Stay on the blue trail. Curiosity almost sent me down the red route. Instead, I stayed blue. Around 9, I heard voices. Children laughing somewhere beyond the mangroves. Then, a woman calling someone's name. The voices sounded close. Less than 50 yards away. I paddled toward them. The sound immediately moved farther away. I stopped. So did the voices. I figured another group was exploring a nearby tunnel. The mangroves distorted sound. Simple explanation. Another 20 minutes passed. Then I saw a kayak. Bright orange. Pulled halfway onto a muddy bank. Nobody nearby. Its paddle floated beside it. A dry bag remained strapped to the rear deck. I called out. No answer. As I drifted closer, I noticed the water bottle still sitting in the cup holder. Half full. A pair of sunglasses rested on the seat. Whoever owned the kayak hadn't packed up. They'd just left. I debated calling park rangers. Before I could decide, I heard footsteps. Someone walking through the mangroves, crunching shells, breaking small branches. The sound circled me, always behind the trees, never visible. Then, it stopped. A man's voice quietly said, "Wrong trail." I turned immediately. Nothing. My phone still showed full battery. No signal. Odd. I'd had service at the launch. The farther I paddled, the stranger everything became. The water looked familiar. Too familiar. Every bend resembled the previous one. Every tunnel looked identical. I checked the GPS. The map refused to rotate. My location arrow spun in circles. Eventually, I reached another floating trail marker. Blue arrow. Exactly like the last one. Then another. Then another. Each numbered. Except, the numbers kept changing. Marker 4. Marker 7. Marker 2. Marker 9. There was no logical order. I finally decided to head back. I turned around. Or at least, I thought I did. 20 minutes later, I reached the same orange kayak. Still abandoned. Still sitting exactly where it had been. The water suddenly felt colder. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice. The birds had disappeared. The wind had stopped. Even the insects seemed gone. The entire refuge had become unnaturally quiet. Then, I noticed another kayak. Blue. Floating upside down. 50 yards away. Then another. Green. Wedged beneath mangrove roots. Then another. White. Resting against a muddy shoreline. Every one of them empty. I counted 6 before I stopped looking. The footsteps returned. This time, on my left, keeping pace with the kayak. 1 step. Pause. 1 step. Pause. I paddled faster. The footsteps matched me perfectly. Then, 3 sharp knocks echoed beneath my kayak. Not against the side. Directly underneath. Knock. 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 The hull vibrated beneath my feet. I froze. Several seconds later, 3 more knocks. Closer to the bow. Moving beneath the kayak. Without warning, the footsteps stopped. Complete silence. A whistle echoed somewhere ahead. 1 short blast. Then another. Not a bird. Definitely a whistle. I remembered something from kayaking safety courses. Rangers sometimes used whistles to signal visitors. Relieved, I paddled toward the sound. The mangrove suddenly opened. The launch sat directly ahead, exactly where I'd started. Only, something was wrong. The parking lot was empty. Every vehicle had disappeared, mine included. I paddled to the dock, pulled the kayak ashore, looked around. No people, no cars, nothing. Only fresh tire tracks leading out of the parking lot, as if everyone had left minutes earlier. Then my phone buzzed. Signal returned instantly. 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail. My sister. The message timestamp made my stomach drop. 6:42 p.m. I looked at my watch. It read 6:45. I'd launched a little after 7 that morning. I was certain I'd only been paddling for 3 hours. Somehow, the entire day had disappeared. I called my sister. She answered immediately. "Where have you been?" "I've been kayaking. You left before sunrise." "It's almost 7. I couldn't explain it, because I didn't understand it myself. Before driving home, I stopped at the visitor center. A ranger listened quietly while I described the abandoned orange kayak. He looked confused, then asked, "What orange kayak?" I pointed toward the map, the one near the blue trail. He slowly shook his head. "There hasn't been an abandoned kayak reported here." Then he paused. "You stayed on the blue trail, right?" I nodded. He looked relieved. "I'd keep doing that. I never went back to that refuge." A few months later, I searched online for photographs. One visitor had uploaded a panoramic image of the launch from the exact day I'd been there. The timestamp matched my arrival. The parking lot was full. My truck appeared in the corner. So did every other vehicle I'd seen. One thing caught my attention. Down at the dock, a lone kayaker was launching into the water. Blue shirt, gray hat, my kayak, my paddle, me. Standing beside the dock, watching me leave, was someone else. A man wearing a faded life jacket, one hand resting on the railing, looking directly at the camera. Nobody in the comments mentioned him. Nobody seemed to notice. Sometimes, I'll zoom in on that photograph. The man's face is never any clearer. But every time I look, he seems just a little closer to the water, like he's waiting for the next person to launch alone. One of the first things you're taught as a kayaker is never to lose your paddle. Without it, you're at the mercy of the current. The wind decides where you go. The water decides where you stop. That's why experienced paddlers always carry a spare. During one trip along the Wisconsin River, I found a paddle drifting by itself. Bright red, almost brand new. No kayak nearby. No backpack. No life jacket. Just the paddle. I should have left it where it was. Instead, I picked it up, looking back. I think that was the moment the trip stopped feeling real. This happened in September of 2022. I'd been kayaking rivers for almost 8 years. Unlike lakes, rivers always kept you moving. You couldn't simply stop and float for hours. The current carried you forward. Every bend revealed something new. That weekend, I planned a solo 20-mile paddle down a quiet stretch of the Wisconsin River. Nothing difficult. Class 1 current. Warm weather. No storms expected. I'd arranged for a local shuttle service to drop me upstream while my truck waited at the takeout. I'd done trips like this dozens of times. The launch sat beneath an old railroad bridge. A retired volunteer greeted everyone arriving that morning. He handed out river maps, talked about water levels, pointed out shallow areas. As I loaded my gear, he noticed I was alone. "You finishing before dark?" "That's the plan." He nodded, then quietly added, "If you find anything floating, leave it." I smiled. "Trash? Anything?" Before I could ask what he meant, another group arrived. The conversation ended. The first several hours were exactly what I expected. Gentle current, tall sandstone bluffs, bald eagles circling overhead. Occasionally another kayak passed in the opposite direction. Everyone waved. Everything felt normal. Around noon, I stopped on a sandbar to eat lunch. Only one other kayak rested nearby. A blue touring kayak. No paddler. I assumed they'd gone hiking. Nothing unusual. After eating, I launched again. The blue kayak remained exactly where it had been. Still empty. About 45 minutes later, I rounded a bend. Something floated near the middle of the river. Bright red. At first I thought it was a life jacket. Then I realized it was a kayak paddle. High-end carbon fiber. Hardly any scratches. It looked expensive. I looked around. No overturned kayak. No people waving for help. Nothing. The river stretched empty in both directions. I remembered the volunteer's advice. Leave it. Instead, I reached out and pulled it into my kayak. Maybe someone farther downstream would be looking for it. That felt like the responsible thing to do. Within minutes, the current changed. Not stronger, slower. The kayak suddenly felt heavier. Every paddle stroke required more effort. I checked beneath the hull. Nothing caught underneath. No weeds. No fishing line. Everything looked fine. Then, I noticed another kayak. Green. Floating along the opposite shoreline. Empty. No paddle. No gear. Just drifting slowly with the current. An hour later, another one. Yellow. Half submerged against a fallen tree. Also empty. By mid-afternoon, I'd counted 5 abandoned kayaks. Every one of them missing only one thing. Their paddle. The red paddle lay across my lap. Clouds moved overhead. The sunlight faded. Birdsong disappeared. The only sound remaining was water moving around the kayak. Then, I heard another paddle. Not mine. Behind me. One stroke. Pause. Another stroke. Slow. Steady. Someone was following me. I looked back. The river was empty. Still, the sound continued, always matching my pace. I sped up. So did it. Eventually, I rounded a long bend and saw another paddler ahead. Finally, a man in a gray kayak, wide-brimmed hat, fishing rod behind his seat. Relieved, I waved. He didn't respond. He simply continued drifting. I paddled harder. The distance never changed. No matter how fast I moved, he remained exactly 100 yards ahead. The river narrowed between high rock walls. The current accelerated. The gray kayak entered first. I followed. Halfway through, the paddling sound behind me stopped. Complete silence. For several seconds, I felt relieved. Then, 3 taps echoed against my hull. Tap, 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 from underneath. Not loud, just enough to feel through the seat. I froze. Another 3 taps. Closer to the bow. Then silence again. The canyon opened into another wide stretch of river. The gray kayak had disappeared. Completely. No side channels. No islands. Nowhere it could have gone. My GPS watch vibrated. The map screen had frozen. Instead of showing river miles, every distance marker read the same thing. Mile 13. No matter how far I paddled, the number never changed. Late that afternoon, I spotted a small riverside campground. Relieved, I paddled toward it. Several picnic tables, fire rings, a boat ramp. Exactly what I needed. Except, there weren't any people. 3 pickup trucks sat in the parking lot. 2 tents stood beside the trees. 1 campfire still smoldered. Someone's coffee mug rested on a picnic table. Yet nobody was there. I called out. No answer. I pulled my kayak onto shore. The red paddle suddenly rolled off my deck, landing in the sand. I picked it up. Without thinking, I leaned it against a tree. The moment I let go, a strong gust of wind swept through the campground. The first wind I'd felt all day. Leaves rustled. Birds began singing again. Insects buzzed around the grass. The silence broke instantly. Far downstream, I heard another kayak approaching. A real one. 2 paddlers. Laughing. Talking. Completely ordinary. I looked back toward the tree. The red paddle was gone. One of the paddlers landed beside me. He looked exhausted. You all right? Yeah. I pointed toward the river. Did either of you lose a red paddle? Both men exchanged confused looks. What red paddle? I drove home that evening. The trip should have taken 6 hours. According to my GPS, it had taken nearly 11. I couldn't account for the missing time. Several weeks later, I searched local kayaking forums. Buried in an old discussion, someone mentioned finding abandoned kayaks along that same stretch of river. The replies dismissed it as rumor. One comment stood out. It simply read, "If you find the red paddle, don't carry it." No explanation. No username. The account had been deleted. I still paddle rivers every fall. I still prefer solo trips. Most things floating downstream are exactly what they seem. A log, a cooler, a lost fishing rod. Most. But every now and then, I'll catch a flash of bright red drifting quietly around the next bend. I never paddle closer anymore. I simply let the current carry it away. Because somewhere downstream, I have a feeling, someone else is about to decide. It probably belongs to another kayaker,